When we look back at the Sierra Nevada, we usually think of the beauty, but there's a real weight to the silence up there, especially when you start talking about Keddie.
It's true. It's such a heavy case. And I think the isolation of that place is really the key to understanding why Cabin 28 still feels so present, even decades later.
Exactly. In the spring of '81, those ponderosa pines went from being a sanctuary for the Sharp family to something much darker. It's like the forest itself just closed in on them.
Right. It became a cage. And back then, in that analog world, the truth just got buried under layers of fear and, honestly, some real incompetence. It's a bit unsettling to think that the mountains might be the only ones left who actually know what happened that night.
It's really striking how much the atmosphere of Keddie had changed by the early '80s. It wasn't that thriving railroad hub anymore. It had become this crumbling relic, just holding on.
Exactly. It's such a heavy case when you look at the setting. It wasn't a vacation spot anymore. It was more of a last resort for people trying to start over, or even to hide. You have these families living in cabins just feet apart, yet the isolation of that place is key.
Right. The woods are so thick there, and you have the constant rushing sound of Spanish Creek, which paradoxically makes you feel miles away from anyone. It's like the community was sitting right on the fringe of society.
It really was. The peeling paint, the weathered wood, it's a bit unsettling because it feels like the world had just moved on and left them behind. It really set the stage for the peace of that little enclave to be completely shattered.
Looking at the floor plan of Cabin 28, it's deceptively large. It has this strange quality where it feels cozy one minute and then suddenly cavernous the next, depending on how the light hits those walls.
It really does. And walking in, it's just so quintessential 1981. You've got the cheap wood paneling and the chaotic energy of a big family. Sue Sharp had 5 kids living there. It's such a heavy case because it felt like a real lived-in home.
It was. But the layout is what's really crucial here. The walls were thin, yet the house had these odd pockets of acoustic isolation. The bedrooms were separated by this narrow hallway, almost cutting them off from the rest of the space.
Exactly. The isolation of that place is key. The living room was the heart of the home, cluttered with school books and laundry. But it's unsettling to think about that television set just sitting there, playing a silent role in everything that was about to happen.
You look at Sue Sharp, and you really see this incredible resilience. She wasn't just moving to Keddie for a change of scenery. She was trying to build a sanctuary for her kids, a way out of a really turbulent, abusive past.
It's such a heavy case, but you can't help but feel for her. She was doing her best with limited resources, and neighbors saw her as this kind, fiercely protective mother. Cabin 28 was supposed to be their healing space.
Exactly. And what's so tragic is that the isolation of that place, that quietude she craved, is exactly what made them vulnerable. It felt like a blessing at first, but help was just too far away.
Right. It's unsettling to realize that while she was just trying to navigate life as a single mom, there were eyes in the shadows. They weren't looking out for the family. They were tracking them.
Just waiting. It's a sobering reminder of how that sense of safety can be so fragile. April 11th, 1981 started with this almost deceptive sense of normalcy. It was just a quiet Saturday at the resort, very slow and languid.
It's such a heavy case because of that routine. You have Sue Sharp just being a mom, driving everyone around, that shuttle service rhythm that defines so many lives.
Exactly. And her son John and his friend Dana were just typical 15-year-olds, just wandering around Quincy looking for adventure in a town that didn't have much of it.
The isolation of that place is key, especially as the sun dipped behind the mountains. As those long purple shadows stretched over the valley, they all headed back to Cabin 28, never realizing the clock was already ticking down their final hours.
It's the detail about Dana Wingate that really stays with me. He wasn't even supposed to be at Cabin 28 that night.
It's such a heavy case. He was just tagging along with John Sharp, probably just looking to escape his own home life for a few hours.
Exactly. Witnesses even saw them hitchhiking back to Keddie earlier that evening, just laughing. They had that sense of invincibility you only really have at that age.
Right, but then they walk through that door, likely right into a nightmare already in progress. It's grounded in this tragic happenstance, just being in the wrong place at the worst possible time.
It really changed the whole dynamic. Dana's presence turned what might have been a targeted family attack into a chaotic massacre that claimed an innocent bystander. When you look at the map of that night, what really sticks with me is just how close the danger was. Right next door, in Cabin 26, you have Marty Smart and this man, Bo Bubiday.
It's such a heavy case. And those two, they're a volatile mix. You've got Smart, a vet with a real history of outbursts, and then Bubiday, who supposedly had these deep ties to organized crime.
Exactly. And they weren't exactly laying low that evening. They were seen at the backdoor bar, drinking heavily, just acting off, erratic.
Right, and it feels like the motive was already simmering. Smart had this deep grudge against Sue Sharp because he thought she was counseling his wife to leave him.
It's the isolation of that place that makes it so unsettling, to think that that kind of animosity was living just yards away. They didn't even have to travel to reach her door. It's such a heavy case to look back on. When night falls over Keddie, that mountain air just drops, and the whole resort gets so quiet. Sue was seen earlier that evening, but by 10 p.m., the lights in those cabins were just flickering out one by one. And then, inside Cabin 28, things take such a dark turn.
Exactly. It's the blitz attack element that really stays with you. Just sudden and overwhelming. And you're right about the isolation. The silence of those mountains is so deceptive. It can carry a sound for miles, but it's also remarkably good at just swallowing a scream.
It's the most baffling part, really. You have thin walls, close quarters, and a struggle involving 5 people, yet the neighbors heard nothing. It's unsettling to think how the community could be so close while something that horrific remained completely unheard. It's such a heavy case, especially when you think about Sheila Sharp. She was only 14 at the time, and she'd spent the night at a friend's house right next door. Just a normal sleepover.
Exactly. And it's heart-wrenching to realize that one simple choice saved her life, but it also put her right in the path of what was coming.
Right. It's 7:45 a.m., a crisp Sunday morning. The mountain mist is just starting to clear, and she's walking back to Cabin 28 to change for church. Everything looks completely peaceful from the outside.
The isolation of that place is really the key here. She has no idea as she reaches for that doorknob that her entire world is about to be violently pulled away. It's that final moment of her childhood innocence, right before she steps inside.
It's a quiet Sunday morning in the woods, and Sheila opens the door to Cabin 28. But what she sees, her mind just can't process it. It's an absolute slaughterhouse.
It's such a heavy case, and honestly, the isolation of that place is key to why it's so haunting. She's looking at her mother, her brother, and his friend, all bound with electrical wire, and there's this sense of deep, personal rage in the room.
Exactly. That detail of the yellow blanket partially covering her mother, Sue, it's those small things that really stick with you. The level of overkill suggests something much darker than a random crime.
It really does. And Sheila's reaction, that frozen, silent shock before she finally ran for help, it's just heartbreaking. It remains one of the most traumatic discovery scenes in California's history.
You look at the response back in '81, and you really have to consider the setting. Rural Plumas County. It was just a different world for law enforcement.
It's so true. It's a heavy case to look back on because those deputies were just
They were completely out of their depth for a mass casualty event of that magnitude.
Exactly. And the forensics? They were purely analog. No DNA kits, no digital imaging, just some Polaroids and handwritten notes that couldn't possibly capture the full gravity of what happened.
And the lack of containment is what really stays with me. People were just walking in and out of the cabin. The chain of custody was fragile from minute one.
It's unsettling to think about. Those cruiser lights flashing against the pines, creating that strobe effect. It's such a vivid, eerie metaphor for how disoriented the whole investigation became.
Yeah. When the evidence is being trampled before the team even realizes what they have, it's just a tragedy in itself. It really is.
You know, when you look at the layout of Cabin 28, the proximity is what really sticks with you. The violence was right there in the living room, but in that back bedroom, 3 young boys were just there, untouched.
It's such a heavy case to sit with. Ricky, Greg, and little Justin, they were just feet away from the carnage. And yet when Sheila and the neighbors arrived, the boys seemed almost oblivious.
Exactly. And that's the question that's plagued investigators for decades. How do you sleep through that kind of struggle? The screaming, the sheer weight of it?
Right. It's unsettling to think about, but you have to wonder if it was actually sleep or if they were just paralyzed, just hiding under the covers, listening to the horror and hoping they wouldn't be next. They really are the silent witnesses of that night.
You know, looking back at the Keddie case, it's such a heavy thing to process, especially when you consider the children involved.
Exactly. And their accounts were so muddled early on, which makes sense given the trauma. But then you have Justin Smart, whose story started shifting from this vague dream into something much more, well, visceral.
It's unsettling, really. He goes from describing a boat on the water to, under hypnosis, detailing the murders themselves. He talks about a hammer and 2 men, one with a mustache. It's so specific.
Right. And even though his testimony was inconsistent, he was sharing details a child simply shouldn't have known. It's like his memory became this fragmented map of fact and dissociation, one that the police just couldn't quite learn how to read.
You know, there's a point in the report where the tragedy takes on this even more unsettling layer. As the investigators are identifying the victims, they realize 12-year-old Tina Sharp is just gone. She wasn't among the dead, but she wasn't with the survivors either.
It's such a heavy case. That realization that the killers actually took her with them, it changes everything. It shifts the whole nature of the crime from a massacre to a kidnapping.
Exactly. And the isolation of that place is key here. You have dogs and helicopters scouring that incredibly rough terrain, yet she's just nowhere to be found.
It makes you wonder about the motive. Was she a specific target, or just a witness who happened to wake up? It's heartbreaking, really. For 3 years, her disappearance was this literal phantom haunting the entire investigation.
When you look at the autopsy reports from Cabin 28, it's such a heavy case to sit with. The sheer ferocity of what happened in that room is really hard to wrap your head around.
It really is. And I think the isolation of that place is key to understanding the narrative here. They used 2 different hammers and a steak knife, just ordinary household items. It suggests this wasn't some calculated professional hit. It was messy, spontaneous, and deeply personal.
Exactly. And that steak knife, the blade was bent severely from the force they used. To me, that bent metal is the ultimate symbol of the unbridled rage that was unleashed there.
Right, and the forensics tell an even more unsettling story. The blood spatter indicates the victims were actually moved and repositioned. It paints a picture of sadism and control, a prolonged event rather than a quick execution. It's incredibly tragic.
It's such a heavy case. But looking at the records, Marty Smart just jumps off the page. His behavior right after the murders, it was just so erratic.
It really was. And the part that stays with me, the part that feels truly unsettling, is how he handled that police interview. He actually volunteered information about a lost claw hammer.
Exactly. He described it in such vivid detail. You have to wonder why someone would mention a missing weapon to investigators unless they were trying to get ahead of the story. It's that classic suspect behavior, over-explaining.
It's a lot to process, especially when you see he failed the polygraph and was right there at the scene. The fact that no charges were ever brought, that disconnect between the evidence and the silence from the authorities is just baffling.
You know, digging back into those dusty Plumas County files, there's one piece of evidence that just stops you cold. It's a letter Marty Smart wrote to his wife, Marilyn, right after the murders.
It's such a heavy thing to read. He actually wrote, "I've paid the price of your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through." It's a direct confession, isn't it?
Exactly. And the most unsettling part isn't just the words. It's that it was buried for years. Marilyn says she gave it to the police, but it just sat there, ignored by the people meant to solve this.
It really is a monument to how the system failed those victims. It's heartbreaking to think that a literal admission of guilt was just left to gather dust.
It's 1984, 3 years after the tragedy, and a bottle collector is wandering through a remote area called Camp 18, miles away from Keddie, and he finds a cranium. It's confirmed through dental records. It's Tina Sharp.
It's such a heavy case. That discovery really changed the pulse of the investigation. It shifted from a missing person search to a confirmed quadruple homicide. But it's the location that's so unsettling.
Exactly. Camp 18 is rugged, difficult terrain. You don't just stumble into it. The fact that she was found there implies the killer knew those mountain back roads intimately.
Right. The isolation of that place is key. It suggests a vehicle was used and a very calculated disposal. It's a sobering thought, but it shows just how much the person behind this felt at home in those woods.
It's just so heavy, isn't it? You have these decades passing by, and you almost assume the truth died right along with Marty Smart and Beau Boubidet.
Right. It feels like those secrets are just gone. But there's something about the way the earth holds on to things. It's like it's just waiting for the right moment to give them up.
Exactly. And in 2016, this new investigator finally follows that thread to a pond in the area. He's out there with a metal detector, and he pulls this rusted, decayed steel hammer out of the mud.
And it matches the exact description of the one Smart claimed he'd lost. It's a silent artifact of the violence, really. It's unsettling to think it was just sitting there the whole time.
It really is. It validates 35 years of suspicion in a single moment. It proves the evidence was always there. It just needed someone to finally care enough to look.
Exactly. It brings it all back to the surface.
It's been 40 years since the lights went out in Cabin 28. And even though they finally tore the building down in 2004, that scar is still there. It's such a heavy case to sit with, especially when you realize the physical site is gone, but the weight of it hasn't lifted at all.
Exactly. You can remove the wood and the nails, but you can't really erase that kind of psychic wound. It's a testament to a total loss of innocence, and honestly, a heartbreaking failure of justice. The isolation of that place is key. It's how something so terrible could happen, while the world just kept spinning.
Right. And we're left with these haunting fragments, a rusted hammer, a confession letter that was ignored for far too long. It's incredibly unsettling to think about those 3 boys sleeping right through the nightmare in the next room.
It really is. The mountains are good at keeping secrets, but I find it reassuring that modern tech is finally catching up. There's a real hope now that the final pieces will fall into place. But it makes you wonder, after 40 years, do you think the truth is still hiding up there in the woods? We'd love to hear what you think.